Welcome back, everyone. Today I wanted to show some really cool shader tricks. Here we have a model that's done by my student, and these are where the wings are at currently. So I've got the standard surface ready to go here, and it's got this map that was painted in Substance Painter that has the wings textures ready to go. The only thing is it's just looking a little flat. And we can kind of make this a bit more interesting just using some shader tricks and additional maps. So one thing that I would recommend is using a normal map for this one. I think that once we add in a normal map and get some interest to this surface a bit more, we can get the light to pick up rather than having these large swaths of light hitting it. It'll break up a little bit more by the normal map. So I'm going to hit Tab, File, Texture, and I've already created one in Painter. It's really just a couple of tilables thrown together to get some various interest. There's nothing really specific about it. Let's open up that normal map. All right, so we want to make sure we set our color settings here because we are rendering in ACG. So this is going to mean we need to change our color space of every file node. So I'm going to set my color space here, Scene Linear ACG. I'll do that to my normal map as well. Now I need to make myself a node to control the normal map. So I'm going to use a bump 2D. We are rendering in Arnold, so I could also use an AI bump. All right, middle mouse drag that into bump value and change that to tangent space normals. Now I'll be plugging this into the bump mapping slot of the shader. So select the shader, roll down to the geometry rollout, and middle mouse drag that into bump mapping. Okay, so I can see that it's working. Typically, anytime I plug in a normal map, I usually do turn it down right away. I'm gonna change mine to, in this case, I'm gonna do probably 0.1, pretty low. A lot of times by default, I'll start out at 0.35 or 0.4. Okay, so this is what we had before. Let's go ahead and render that and see what that looks like. Okay, a little bit more interest is added there. We can see some details coming in, maybe some highlights picking up here from the lighting. But the thing is, we can't really tell entirely what it's doing because we're only looking at the beauty pass. So what I want to do is add some AOVs. AOVs are used in comp to be able to pull out the different channels and increase, let's say, the specularity or the ambient occlusion, that sort of thing. There's lots of uses for AOVs, but when we're test rendering, it's also useful to use AOVs to see what a certain channel looks like. So I'm going to go into, I've opened up my render settings here. So we start out typically in the common tab. I want to go over into the AOVs tab, and I'm going to select specular and click the two arrows pointing right to add that to active AOVs. Typically, I do work with more AOVs than just this. All right, now we're gonna have to render it again. And before it's even done, we can check in the specular channel to see what that looks like. All right, so it's picking up some lighting information. It's really just some black and white information in terms of how much reflectivity these wings have. But there is going to be now, because of that normal map, there is more interest in that lighting information. But what I want to do now is I want to give it an iridescent look, and that's going to require some shader work. I'm going to click pause there. All right. So aside from just using the iridescence, I also want to change the opacity of it. These wings are single-sided planes, so transmission is not going to work, and that means glass-like settings. It's not going to give us the desired effect here, so I'm going to instead use an opacity map. This has already been painted in Substance Painter and exported, so I'm just going to plug it in now. All right, and there's our wings mask. So anywhere that is white is going to be fully opaque. Anywhere that is not white, more gray, or even black is going to mean how much transparent it is. All right, so we can plug that in before we start to test some of the specularity treatments, we'll get this set. So I'm going to middle mouse drag that into opacity, and then we can render that to see what that does. Okay, so we can see that it's working right away, but it might be a bit too transparent. If this is the case, you don't actually have to adjust the map on the painter side if you don't want to. You can use some nodes in Maya in order to adjust that balance of the texture. You can also use the nodes as temporary to do some testing to figure out how much less transparent you want it before jumping back into Painter or Mari to make those updates. I'm going to click pause here. A really good node for doing this in Arnold is the AiRange. AiRange is really good for adjusting black and white maps. Additionally, I don't think I set the color settings of this node. So you can see here on the file node, we've got it's set to sRGB, and this is a black and white map. So additionally, we would want alpha is luminance clicked on. So I'm going to go into scene linear, ACE is CG, alpha is luminance checked on. We need to re-render this just to see what difference it caused. Slight difference. We can see now it's a little bit more opaque, less transparency coming through. But still, I think it's a little bit too transparent at what I'm calling the panes portion of the wings. So we've got the veins and the panes, and these panes are still a little bit too see-through. So I'm going to use that AiRange, middle mouse drag that into input, and we can mess with kind of a whole bunch of settings here, but for something like this, contrast pivot is probably going to be what gives us the best effect. Let's see, turn the contrast up and then mess with the contrast pivot. So I'm looking at getting that whiter. So we can see we get this really tiny preview right here, but it's going to give us an indication of how much it's changing. So it's removing some of that darkness. Now we want to drag and drop that into the shader. So that will now plug into the shader. Okay, so transparent, but a little bit less so than our last render. All right, so now we're ready to move on to making some adjustments with specularity. I felt like this would look really cool with some iridescence. I'm gonna go ahead and pause that. There's multiple ways that you can get iridescent looks. In Arnold, there's what's known as the thin film. Thin film exists actually within the shader. You can play with that if you want to. There's a drop down for it. It's a little bit hard to control, and it's not a very strong effect, but it is easy. It's easy to just turn it on. Typically, it needs pretty high values in order to have any effect. But what I prefer to do is to use a ramp setup. So I'm going to click Tab, start typing in ramp, and use a ramp texture. And I'm just going to start placing some markers. All you have to do is click down, and it's going to make some new segments along this ramp. I don't actually know where these need to be. You can adjust these at any point. Farther apart is going to mean these iridescent color shifts happen. Broader, they're a bit farther apart. You can also move these very close together, even essentially on top of each other like this, in order to get quick color shifts in case if you're doing, let's say, a fabric that's really sparkly, you may want to have these really close together. All right, so the ramp is good to start, but now what I want to do is I'm gonna delete this place 2D texture. We don't want this ramp to apply to the object based on the UVs. We want it to apply based on the camera. So we're going to delete that, hit Tab, and type in sampler info. This is going to make a facing ratio for us. This is what's going to give us that ability to have the color shifts happen as the character turns. So I'm going to open up my UV coordinates of the ramp, and then I'm going to click the white dot of the sampler info, go to facing ratio, and plug that into V coordinates. All right, so that's essentially set up for right now, but now we need to get those colors set up. I'm going to hit Tab and use a layer texture. All right, so I'm gonna just set a color swatch here. So this is gonna give me a very pink, colorful, specular color because I'll be plugging this into spec color. But what I want to do is have the iridescence on the panes of the wings and not on the veins of the wings. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna make an additional layer. Just click anywhere in the gray space, it'll make another swatch for you. The only thing is you then have to move it. Middle mouse drag that over to the left-hand side because what we want to do is we're going to use the same veins texture that we plugged into the AiRange. We're going to use the same one in order to hold it out from the specularity. I want to use another AiRange though, because right now, if we take a look at the texture, it's got a lot of white and gray. Essentially, we're going to want the texture to be white and black. In a PBR workflow for the specularity, the spec color should be white. That's if you're not doing something special like metalness will multiply the base color into the spec color to give that metal look. Iridescent, we're using color in the spec channel as well. But for anything standard, the spec color should just be white. So essentially we want those veins to be white and the panes, we're gonna need them to be black. So I'm gonna hit tab again. We're gonna use another AiRange and then we'll just plug in that texture again. But now we're gonna adjust this until we get black values. I'm gonna try the contrast first and then we can try the contrast pivot. All right, so turning the contrast pivot up is starting to get us those black values for the panes and retain the white values for the veins. All right, so now we've got our layer texture. I'm gonna middle mouse drag that AiRange onto that green swatch. So now it's over the top and we just wanna change this blend mode here. I'm gonna set this to add. We wanna use the white values of that texture and not the black. We want the black values to get ignored, so that's why we're setting it to add. All right, so now we've got this one set up. I'm gonna select my ramp and I'm gonna plug this into a couple of these swatches. So I've got this one in the middle here. I'm gonna middle mouse drag that into selected color. I'll do it a couple of times with the same one. Middle mouse drag that layer texture there and this one here as well. And maybe I'll make an additional swatch. Okay. So now to get those color shifts, we need to hue shift this layer texture. We have more than one option. We could make another layer texture setup and have a different swatch color, or we could take what's coming out of this layer texture and hue shift it. So I'm gonna do that. I'm gonna make an AI color correct. And I'm just gonna middle mouse drag this layer texture into the input. And I'm gonna take this hue shift and kind of play with it until it looks like something good. All right, this like very bright teal color. And now I will map that into some of these positions on the ramp. All right, I'm gonna do the same thing again. I'm gonna make another AI color correct and plug in. So with my color correct selected, it then shows us the input here that's available. Middle mouse drag that layer texture into the input, and now I'll do another hue shift, but I'll make it different. Maybe just kind of like greenish yellow. All right, so now wherever there's an open slot, I'm gonna go ahead and plug in this AI color correct. You can do this as many times as you need to, as many times as you want to have some hue shifts in place for this ramp texture. You can have more. I don't recommend less. I do think that you need at least 3 different colors in order to get the hue shift look as the object is moving. That's what really gives it the iridescent effect. All right, so now we just want to kind of click through these different slots and make sure that something is assigned to each one. We can see the little square with the triangle icon showing that it's assigned. So if you have any extras, You can always just, like, let's say you accidentally make an extra one, you just hit the little X button at the bottom to get rid of it. All right, so now let's finally plug this setup into our specular color. So we're going to go up here, middle mouse drag that ramp into spec color, and then we can render. All right, so it's a little bit difficult to see just in the beauty pass as to what this is actually doing. But if we switch over to our specular, we can get a better view of it. So now we can see that we're actually getting colors within that spec channel. And if you're not seeing what you are hoping for, you can, let's move everything so we can see this all a little bit better. You can jump into that ramp and you can adjust the placement as needed. So maybe it needs to be a little bit more to the left of this ramp. I'm not 100% sure. This takes some experimentation to see what it actually needs for placement. Okay, I feel like we're starting to get some nice color variations here. We've got some pinks coming through over here. Another big way to test this would be to actually have the object move. So if we select the character and we can rotate it and kind of see, we'll start to see those color shifts happening. These kind of iridescent effects really come to life when the object actually moves. So if it's a single asset and you're doing a turntable, or this is an animated asset, this is when we're gonna see that iridescence come to life. It's really hard to get the effect to work really, really well for just a single still image. But the cool thing is you can go in and adjust that placement however you want using the ramp. It's all very, very adjustable. Just with how you place it along the ramp is going to dictate where it falls on the object. Additionally, you can go in and adjust these color corrects at any point and add in additional information as needed. There you go. That is how you can use iridescence in the shader using a ramp to drive that aspect, and how you can use an opacity map to drive the transparency, as well as using the AiRange nodes to be able to adjust those on the fly. Want to learn more? Check out Misaligned Learning on Patreon, an education platform dedicated to teaching professional asset production techniques for CG creation. Hosted by myself, Lauren Pillay, and Jackie Marion Regan, along with guest teachers who are also professionals in the animation industry.